You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 165.
Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life. Hello, and welcome to the Balanced Educator Podcast. Today, I am only here for the introduction, as today's episode was an interview recorded by Kaylee. So in this episode of the Balanced Educator Podcast, Kaylee sits down with Lindsay Miller, a kids mindfulness coach, mindfulness educator, and the delightful host of the Stress Nanny podcast. Known for her innovative suitcase tricks and infectious laughter, Lindsay brings over 20 years of child development study and mindfulness certification to the table. Join Kaylee and Lindsay as they dive into the fascinating world of child stress, exploring signs of stress in children, effective strategies to support them, and engaging mindfulness practices that will create an excitement for deep breathing. Lindsay's words of wisdom, garnered from her experience and featured appearances on various platforms and publications, promise to leave a lasting impression as she unravels the secrets of nurturing resilience and fostering children's emotional well-being. So this is an awesome episode. I absolutely loved listening to it as I was prepping it for you. So yeah, enjoy the show. But before we dive in, I just want to share today's sponsor.
Do you want to incorporate social emotional learning and mindfulness into your classroom to support students with mental health, focus, self-regulation, and emotional intelligence? With so much on your plate as a teacher, you probably just don't have time to get trained, develop resources, and teach the lessons yourself. Plus, you need time for self-care too. That's why we developed EduCalm, to support teachers like you. EduCalm is a fully bilingual English and French co-regulation program created by teachers. This program provides everything you'll need to build self-regulation, mindfulness, and social-emotional skills with your students through a 5-minute daily practice. With EduCalm, you don't have to be the expert. Just log in, press play, and participate with your students as you all prepare your minds and bodies for calm and focused teaching and learning together. Go to educalm.com to learn more and start using our free resources. Again, that's educalm.com, spelled EduCalme.
All right, let's dive into this awesome conversation between Lindsay and Kaylee.
Hello there, Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
It's my pleasure, Kaylee. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's jump right in. I'd love to know, can you share with your audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my name is Lindsay Miller and I'm the Stress Nanny. I started the Stress Nanny 5 years ago because I was teaching mindfulness and healthy habits to women. And we were going through all these different patterns that had kind of evolved for them when they were really young. And I'd had my own experiences with stress, like as a young adult, as a teenager. And I recognized that if these women had had the tools, that we were learning now, that they were in their 40s, if they'd had them at a younger age, it would have made such a difference for them, and they would have been able to cultivate a different level of resilience. The things that I teach are around mindfulness, emotional regulation, similar to what you're working on, self-awareness and stress resilience. And so if those tools could kind of get embedded in a life, at a young age, I was super curious what that would look like and how it would change the, trajectory of those lives. So I started introducing different methods, different ways of teaching, these concepts that were a little bit more abstract to kids. And I came up with some super playful ways, some fun ways that enabled kids to connect with the idea of mindfulness, connect with the idea of self-awareness, and then apply it pretty consistently. I use a lot of stories and just activity and play-based endeavors to teach kids. And it started to really make a massive difference in the way the kids saw themselves, the way they developed confidence, and the way their lives kind of had more resilience as a result of just kind of weaving these things in super early. So I teach kids and I help families make mindfulness just a part of the culture, similar to the way you do in the classroom.
That's so awesome. I can relate to your story so much. It's pretty much exact same as my story. It's like I felt stress. I found something that worked for me. I shared it with other adults and then realized like, why aren't we sharing this with kids so they don't have to undo all of the patterns and habits that have been learned through years, and we can kind of start fresh, laying the groundwork and kind of like the neural pathways for mindfulness from a young age when it's so much easier.
Exactly. And that's, I see that so often, right? Exactly what you said. When we can make these changes, it's like a tiny change when you're 5 or 7 or 10. And it makes a massive difference, kind of like compound interest, right? When you're 40 or when you're 50, if you've just kind of built from that place. And it's so fun too, because the kids have, you see this, I'm sure, like the ability to pick it up because the neural connections are what they're building every day. It's just easy to integrate new ones and to really strengthen the self-awareness, strengthen that emotional regulation, and make sure those things just get part of the framework that they build on for the whole rest of their lives.
Totally. I'd love to know, how do you define mindfulness?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way I explain it to kids is mindfulness is knowing what's going on inside of you, what's going on outside of you, and then making a choice on purpose. So really, it's a way of describing presence, right? If we're really present, we know what's going on inside of us, we're connected with what's going on outside, and then we move intentionally forward. And so it's just like a 3-step way that kids can really connect.
I love that. That's a really great way of defining it. And I think as adults, a lot of the time we've kind of trained ourselves out of recognizing what's going on inside. We might have even learned to tune out what's going on outside too. So I'd love to chat about that. Like, how do kids respond to this idea of like what's going on inside?
Yeah. So it's fun to see because some of them, like you said, I'll ask a question like, well, what did you think about that? Or how did that feel? And they're like, blank stare, like, I don't even know what you're asking me right now, and it's normal depending on how much self-awareness is cultivated in the home, how much, they're tuned into that themselves, how many opportunities they've had to kind of explore that in a safe way. Because sometimes, like you said, if we've been disconnected from it, either on purpose or because we're punished for feeling the feelings, or because there's some emotional or environmental implication to like really being authentic, then we can easily shut that down, right, as a coping mechanism. And so some kids, like, even though they're still young, they've already learned to kind of shut that off. And so they may not know, or it may just be not something they've practiced. Other kids are, more sensitive kids. I tend to work with a lot of them, and they are super aware, right? Like, I mean, they know all the things, like what they're feeling, what their brother is feeling, what their mom is feeling, what their teacher is feeling. I mean, they know what everybody's feeling, and they're just kind of taking all of it in like a sponge. And so there's definitely a range, right? Where some kids are just coming to the knowledge and it's emerging, and you really have to ask a lot of questions and help them, just give them that space to like tune into what's going on. Another thing that I think is important to keep in mind with this conversation is our kids will be able to sit with their emotion to the extent that we can sit with them with it. So if we're uncomfortable with a certain emotion, it's all, highly unlikely that they're going to come to us and be like, hey, I felt a lot of shame today at school. Can you, can I talk about it with you? If for us, we just kind of like get activated and get stressed out about their shame. And so I think there's a bit of a dance that goes on, right? As we're developing the skills to sit with the emotion and at the same time encouraging them to kind of own it. And that's where I love your work, because I think that the process of like building those skills in tandem, like you do in the classroom with the teacher and student learning together, it really does help both of them come to it with like, hey, we're all learning this, like, let's just do the best we can and grow this skill together. And I think sometimes with parents, it's tricky because they feel like I should know this already. I should be able to teach this to my kid. But just like with teachers, most parents are just trying to figure it out themselves, right? It's not a skill we were taught growing up. And so it's something we're all learning together. So as we recognize kids like making these burgeoning efforts to explore this part of themselves, I think we also have to honor the part of ourselves that's growing that way too.
Thank you for pointing that out. That's so important, is for us to recognize that supporting the kids in our lives, whether it be our own children or our students, with their emotional development can be really hard and triggering as a parent or a teacher. Yeah. Because as you said, there's a lot of things that we've learned to tune out, or that we've learned it's not okay to feel this way. So sitting with a child that feels a way that we were always taught we weren't supposed to feel is really tough, because not only do we have to have empathy for the child in front of us, but it's like showing us that we have to have empathy for ourselves when we were children, and how the tuning out or turning off of emotions, feelings, has impacted us, and how it makes us who we are as an adult, you know? So there's kind of this like unlayering that happens where the child is mirroring our own discomfort. And it's tough. It's challenging, right?
It really is. It really is. And one of the things I think is important, no matter who we are, is to try to be a safe space for that exploration, right? As educators, if we're coming together, making that a part of our conversations, like, oh, I was really triggered today, and finding the person you can kind of work through some of that with in an ally kind of way. And the same with parents, having a trusted source, like the families that I work with, we're constantly in communication about how things are going. And I'll get emails like, this wasn't my finest moment, but this is what I did, and I'm always like, hey, you're learning too. There's nobody that's an expert at this, like right off the bat, right? We have to cultivate those neural connections, cultivate the resilience, cultivate the awareness. And like you pointed out, parents and teachers, I mean, we're working with like decades more kind of like reactions or things that we've been taught or society has kind of communicated to us about those emotions. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot we kind of have to sift through in those conditioned reactions in order to get to the place where we can feel a little bit more spacious about it.
Yeah, it's so true. And, what a great way to kind of practice our own personal development as adults is by just recognizing, oh, this way that this child acted today really triggered me. It was hard for me to hold space for them. It was hard maybe to have empathy. Why is that? Why was I unable to hold space for this emotion when I'm able to hold space for other emotions? And can I kind of untangle that, get to know myself better, and have compassion for myself, for how I've been trained to feel about that emotion and behavior. But it's challenging when you have, 25 different kids in front of you every day with a host of different needs. It's a great way to push ourselves towards self-development. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and also I think the recognition too, like you said, I mean, 25 kids who are like at every point along that range, right? Like if we're talking about those 4 skills, like self-awareness, emotional regulation, stress resilience, and like if we're talking mindfulness, if we're talking about those things as a spectrum, like, and then you have that times 25, there's just so many different combinations of those. So recognizing like, yeah, it's going to take me a while to figure out how to have the capacity for this kind of growth to emerge in my space, in addition to all the other things that I'm trying to teach right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I also have to teach math.
Right. 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 No, and I
Yeah.
think I love the way that you like have built it in so that can become seamless. Because I've seen so many different programs where it clunky, right? Because it's like an unnatural way to build it into the classroom environment. It doesn't feel necessarily sustainable, or it's super compartmentalized. So it's like, here's our mindfulness time. And then we like go on to the rest of our day and kind of forget about what we talked about. But the way you do it allows it to be just like become woven in, right? As this thread throughout the day in different ways it shows up. And it's not like an external thing you're trying to put into the classroom. It's just like something that can naturally kind of emerge and be cultivated in the midst of those interactions. And so I just love the power of that.
Thank you. Yeah, one thing that I've really realized through my mindfulness journey is that it can't be compartmentalized, because what we're doing is
No.
we're setting aside time to learn skills of noticing what's going on inside, what's going on outside, and our reactions to those things. We take the time to
Mm.
actually sit and practice that skill. But then the point is for us to integrate it into our lives, right? Like we're training for life in that mindfulness
Yeah.
practice. So I like to think of, how can I weave mindfulness into everything that I do? How am I weaving these skills into everything that I do? I'm in a season right now where I have a young son, and my mindfulness practice looks very different than it did before I was a parent. Um,
Yeah.
and yet I haven't stopped mindfulness. It's just taken a different shape and form, which is, how can I weave mindfulness into my interactions with my son? How are we practicing together in an age appropriate way? How am I modeling mindfulness? So the practice is always there, but rarely am I sitting on my mat with headphones in, listening to a
Right.
45-minute guided mindfulness practice and emerging from my practice feeling like, I'm shiny and sparkly now. It's just not the case right now. But mindfulness is life.
Yeah, it really is. And I think one of my favorite seasons was when my daughter was about 18 months old. And my mindfulness practice at that point was like our daily walks and just like stopping to explore when she explored. And I remember
Yes.
just that being such a powerful mindfulness practice, like that invitation to presence. And like you said, it opened my eyes to the reality that we can be, practicing in any moment. So I think for teachers, sometimes the moments in our classroom that look like a dumpster fire, those could be moments that are actually really, really powerful, for kids. And it's a matter, like you're saying, of tuning in, being present. And then if we apply what's going on inside of me, I'm feeling super triggered, overwhelmed, and like I have no idea what to do right now, and things feel completely out of control, and then what's going on outside of me. I have a child who just like, whatever it is, spilled the paint all over the paint station, or, just completely had an emotional outburst and is just, everyone is interrupted from their work, or, and like, this is the opportunity. So like, this is where the practice becomes life, like you said, and we take the moment to say, oh, like, I'm going to pause the plan. I'm going to let it, and then I'm going to make a choice on purpose about how I handle this moment and the resilience that I build as a result of this thing I didn't anticipate, but is actually a great opportunity to teach some of these skills in real life.
Yes. The messiest moments are the best opportunities for teaching. Unfortunately, because
Yes.
that's just not what we think, especially as educators. We
Right.
like have this mindset that I've got my lesson plan, this is how
Yeah.
learning happens. But so many of those important learning moments happen on the fly when you least expect it, when things don't go according to plan and you make an adjustment. Can't tell you how many times as a high school teacher I've just paused mid lesson because students were chatting or unfocused, and I was starting to feel my frustration rise. Like, can't you guys just listen for 3 more minutes so then we can get to the activity? Like, just please. And I just
Come
had to
on.
pause. Yeah. And I just like can feel that frustration and
Mhm.
about to like raise my voice. And no, that's not how I want to respond. So I'm going to take a deep
Yeah.
breath. We're going to pause, and I'm going to vocalize what I'm going through. Like, okay, wow, I can see that you guys are having a hard time focusing. Your chatting is making me feel really frustrated. I need a minute to take some deep breaths so that I can return to my calm self and be the best teacher that I can for you. Will you join me with these deep breaths? And so it's just this invitation to, you know what, we all need a pause. Or if they're really fidgety, you know what, we just need to stretch it out a little bit, maybe shake it out. Let's stand up. Let's take some deep breaths, reach our arms up, bring them down as we exhale. Let's like jump around, shake our arms and legs. Let's make some funny noises. Like, whew, we need to reset. And I think just doing that, being clear about that we all need a reset sometimes, really is such an important teachable moment, because it's human. Like if our students think that as adults we never struggle, then they're going to go into adulthood thinking, oh, there's something wrong with me if I'm struggling.
Yeah. No, I think that's so powerful. And I also think, when I work with parents, I talk about the value of the mistake or the value of the challenge, and how those moments are the moments they remember. Right? Like that teaching moment that you just described, that's something that's going to stick with your kids for a long time. Right. And so those are the sticky moments that will stay with them if we, like you said, can be a little bit more vulnerable and authentic and say, hey, this is what's going on for me. Here's how I'm going to deal with it. And recognizing too, as teachers, like no matter how clunky it feels to you as you get started, because like maybe that language feels a little foreign and you're like, I can't say that to my classroom, or, as you're starting out, you're trying to figure out what it looks like for you and kind of get in your groove with it. But like you're probably working with kids who have never heard any of that expressed before, right? Like you're the first person that's going to teach them mindfulness. And so it doesn't matter how clunky it is. If you can just give them some sort of bridge to it, no matter how rickety, like that is going to serve. And then over time, right, you're going to strengthen your approach and you're going to feel more comfortable and it's going to get more natural to you. But just recognize that like it's a gift no matter how you offer it, even if it feels a little uncomfortable.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's so true. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that holds teachers back from starting mindfulness in the classroom is just, I feel awkward starting. It's that taking the first step. It's like, I'm not an expert. I feel weird doing it. And because I don't have it perfect, I can't share it. Because as teachers, we always feel like we need to be the expert before we can teach it, right? But I agree that you just have to start, and it's going to feel awkward at first, and you can just make peace with that and be okay with the imperfection. And it gets easier as you practice more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think too, just as you get started, you can start like on the bigger stresses, right? Like we're talking about the things that are obvious. And then over time, what you start to recognize is these smaller moments, like you get tuned in, right? And you start to recognize the stress as it's manifest in quiet ways or behaviorally, or, like you're attuned to it in a different way because you have the tools to help deal with it. Right. I think sometimes as teachers, you have such a big heart and you want to help in all those ways, but don't always have the tools, right, to address different struggles that kids are having. I remember when I was a resource teacher right out of college, I was, working with these middle schoolers, and I was like, there's so much here that I want to offer them support with, but I don't have the, I don't know how it fits in. Yeah. And I feel like what you offer these ways to really support with some of these things that, as a teacher, you see that it's completely getting in the way of them being able to work. If you have the kid that's like breaking down because they don't know how to do the test, or, you have all these like different needs going on in the classroom, you see it, right? And the more you're willing to just kind of engage with the process of mindfulness, the more you're going to have like the powerful interactions that help resolve and cultivate resilience for those moments that you see every day.
Yes, totally. Now, you're the stress nanny. I'd like to get deeper now into stress specific. Lots of teachers these days, and maybe always, I don't know if teaching was ever a non-stressful job, but it seems to be getting more and more stressful as time goes by. How do you define stress first off?
Yeah, I define it as something that's beyond the child's current capacity to manage skillfully. So whether it's an interaction, whether it's something internal, again, that in what's going on inside, what's going on outside, it could be from either place. It could be a combination of both, but whatever that moment is, the child doesn't have the resources, either internal or external, to navigate that experience. And so they can, be minor things, but they can also be really major things. And so our job then in building stress resilience is to help them cultivate the resources, whether internal or external, to navigate the experience more skillfully.
That's great. I've never heard it described that way. And I think that's really helpful as a teacher, because oftentimes when we as adults think of stress, we think of like all the tasks that we have at our job. It's like stress and overwhelm kind of go together. And as we get older, the things that cause stress for us are very different than what causes stress as a kid. So oftentimes it can be hard to empathize with a child that's stressed over not getting the toy that they wanted. And you're like, that's not that big of a deal.
Come on. Yeah.
Right. Like it could be worse. Like this is a small problem.
Right.
But can we talk a little bit about that? This kind of like how we view stress as adults and how or children, even teens, experience stress?
Yeah, definitely. So let's go to the pandemic, just because this is an example that we can, connect with universally. So as an adult in the pandemic, like I don't know any adults who were not beyond their capacity to deal with it, right? Like we all had to be like cultivating all these tools all the time to figure out how to make it through, right? Whether it was isolation, whether it was fear, whether it was just like money or whatever it was that was coming up for people, there was just beyond their capacity to deal with, and they had to figure out some more resources. So we, as adults, we were working with, again, decades of problem solving, resourcefulness, inner growth and just experience in that situation, right? We're like, okay. And it still was more than what we had, right? Like it still required us to move beyond our current resources for dealing. But for kids, like all of a sudden, these, 5, 7, 10-year-olds, like who've just had a little bit of experience problem solving, a little bit of experience with emotional regulation, a little bit of experience managing external circumstances beyond their control. They were thrown into the same experience as these adults, right? And so they had, just a few years of trying to figure out those skills, and they were adapting and evolving and figuring out what to do. But we saw, behaviors develop, and we're seeing them now, right? That are just manifestations of the fact that that was more than what they had, right? That was like more stress than they had the capacity to manage. And so the kinds of situations we see with like little kids, you see it behaviorally. If they're having a hard time managing emotional regulation, that's a sign that they're navigating emotions beyond their ability to manage, right? So we have the option of trying to decrease the emotions, which for some kids maybe can work by doing some mindfulness and like helping them put things in context. But other kids who are having stuff going on at home or just in the thick of a lot of stress, like those kids, they need to increase their capacity to deal, right? Like, and we need to bring in like more tools and a different kind of outer resources to support their inner resources, because they're going to need both, right, to make it through. So we see that stress manifest in a variety of ways. Again, with little kids, sometimes we'll see it somatically. So we'll see kids with the tummy ache all the time, or, random aches and pains. And those are signs, right? And again, as teachers, sometimes it's hard because we don't have unlimited resources and time and energy to kind of troubleshoot. But that's why I love mindfulness, and especially the work you do, because it casts a wide net that's going to help with so many of those things, right? We're going to be able to create resources for them, inner resources that are going to serve them in a variety of situations and with a variety of stresses. So yeah, having kids express and communicate what they're stressed about, going back to our original conversation, that's the key to this, right? Because if we can help them articulate, we can work with them on developing the resources that they need. But if we are kind of discounting their stress and we're like, that's not a big deal, don't worry about it, then they're like, oh, something's wrong with me. I must be wrong here, because kids just assume that anyway, right? I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't know, my body must be something, like we just have them second guess themselves, which in the thick of like a hurried day, yeah, it's tricky because you don't have time to stop and like address everyone's tummy ache, right? But in the long run, if we can just provide a space or a way for them to manage that stress, whether it's by the calm corner in the classroom, whether it's, I love that calm space exercise that you do, where you do the 5 senses to find your calm place. If we can help them access those general tools of resilience, they can go to them as needed, right? And then over time, they develop more of the inner resources and need less of the external support.
Yeah. What are some unhelpful things that adults say to kids or respond to kids' stress? Things that we should avoid.
Yeah. I think definitely saying it's not that big of a deal. Because if a child is having an emotional reaction to something, they're obviously triggered in some way. And that's not to say we have to sit for 20 minutes and, figure out what's going on. But it just can be honoring like, oh, it seems like you're really sad right now. That sadness seems like it's really big for you. So definitely honoring their experience, because again, if our goal is to teach them self-awareness, we do them no favors by overriding what they tell us is going on with them. We can give perspective and we can have conversation, but that only happens if we're a safe space for that info. And if you shut it down enough times, you're no longer a safe space for the info. I think with kids who are like learning what emotion feels like to them and learning how to manage it, we can, again, check our own triggers, because we may just like say something and not realize it's something we're triggered about. So really being mindful about our teachings, like what we were taught about anger. So for example, in our house, we had like a no crying at the dinner table. And so, if you were crying, you had to like go somewhere else. But in reality, if you're like with other people and needing to kind of talk through a hard experience, that could be a safe place for you, right? So if I respond like no crying at the table, just knee-jerk reaction, it doesn't provide the kind of experience I want. So just checking our reactions. I think for older, like middle school age kids, a lot of times we give them like phone shame. And I think we could take the opportunity to educate instead. So we say, instead of just giving them a hard time for being on their phone, like what purpose do you feel like your phone is serving right now? Like help them develop the awareness they need to manage it as a tool, right? Like, oh, I'm distracting myself. Okay, great that you know that. Oh, I'm feeling kind of lonely, so I'm checking in. Okay, great that you know that. But if we just like see it and judge it right off, we miss the opportunity to build the self-awareness around it. And then for older kids, it's so tricky when they get to that stage where they're starting to pull away and become their own people. And we still see so many things they could be doing much more skillfully in their lives. And we want to kind of give them that info, right? But letting them make mistakes and then sit with those mistakes with them, I think is really important. So I've noticed that tendency in myself with my teenager now. I'm wanting to like help her avoid the mistake. And sometimes as parents, obviously that's our job, right? But there are other times when our job is to help them let them learn the thing in the way that they're choosing to learn it, and be the place they can then process it and move forward more skillfully from. And if we shame them, if we just get angry with them, if we harp on them for mistakes and don't cultivate like that growth mindset, we again are not the safe space for sorting out mistakes. And teenagers, I mean, they're going to make a ton of mistakes, right? Like they need the safe space. So being able to check our reactions and be open about talking things through that are maybe comfortable for us, or maybe we don't understand, or maybe we're like, we've had that conversation 5 times. I don't know why you actually did it that way. Being able to just like check our response creates the moments where we can be mindful in engaging with, whatever behavior is presenting in front of us.
That was so helpful. Thank you for breaking that down into age groups. And I think you really touched on some points that we can we've all experienced as adults, spending time with kids and supporting them. So this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could continue talking forever. I'm sure our audience is going to want to connect with you because you have some wonderful information. How can they connect with you after this episode?
Yeah, I'd love to connect. I have a podcast called the Stress Nanny Podcast. I have a 5-minute mindfulness masterclass, which I think we're going to link to the episode. That's totally free. You can just come and access it. I offer coaching for kids, and then I have, different resources on my website. So feel free to reach out. I have a just a questionnaire that you can fill out around what your child is doing or what you're noticing. And it can be a great resource just for getting a little clarity. And there's no obligation with it or anything, but you can just kind of get a feel for what you're seeing, what you feel like is getting in the way of their, optimal development, and then what you see as kind of like the benchmarks for success. And kind of, anyway, it help you build a plan to kind of move forward so that you feel confident around your approach. And also you feel self-aware about like, what is that? What am I actually seeing right now? So, my website is a place you can find all of those things, thestressnanny.com.
Awesome. Well, we will link to all this in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for sharing your expertise and your time with us. And I am going to be a guest on your podcast as well. So our listeners will definitely have to go listen to that episode as well, where we'll be talking on a different topic. So that'll be another opportunity to listen to us chat if you enjoyed this.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Awesome. Thank you.
How great was that conversation between Lindsay and Kaylee? I absolutely loved it. For the show notes for this episode, if you want to check out the Stress Nanny podcast or her 5-minute mindfulness masterclass, be sure to check out our show notes where all the links are at www.educalm.com/TBE 165. That's educalm.com, EDUCALME/TBE as in the Balanced Educator 165. So during the episode, Kaylee also talked about Educalm and our resources and what we do here at Educalm. And so if you go to the show notes, you will find as well a link to all of the Educalm free resources. So you can get that at www.educalm.com/TBE 165. So that is your exit ticket for today to go click on all the links in our show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, make sure to share it with a friend or a colleague that would get value from it too. Sharing is caring, and we put a lot of time and love into creating these awesome episodes, this awesome content for you every month. And it would make our day if you shared it with someone who would enjoy it too. So thank you in advance for doing that. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Have an awesome month.